Hey gang, my name is Ben, and that's my bucket-shaped robot buddy.
I am made of statistics and cheap plastic.
Last time, I put a new orc team in the champion ladder and found a random opponent. I played that game live on stream, and today we're going to go over the replay and study what happens. Both coaches make some instructive mistakes, and we'll see exactly why our bad choices don't work out. This is gonna be a long video, so get comfortable. We'll mostly be following the game chronologically, but I'm also going to interject some general ideas that apply to any game of Blood Bowl. These include starting formations for both sides of the ball. The 2-1 grind is game plan A for a lot of teams, and we'll learn why. You can't win regularly if you don't protect the ball when you have it. We'll see how to use cage formations to keep your ball carriers safe. Blood Bowl is a game of risk management. Sometimes you'll want to do something dangerous, and when that time comes, you should be sure that your position isn't too bad when you fail. We all make mistakes, and sometimes our dice aren't as wonderful as we'd like. There is often a way to recover when things go wrong, but you won't find it if you're too busy being upset about the past. In preparing this video, I found a lot of things I could have done better in the game. Some small errors, some serious ones, and spotting them should help me stop making them in the future. This can work for everyone. Study your games. It's good advice in any strategy game, and Blood Bowl is no exception. Our opponent today is a Bretonnian team. Brets are a relatively new race, and they aren't even in the version of the rulebook that Blood Bowl 2 is based on. They're a pretty solid team though, so let's take a look. Brets have 3 types of players available. Their linemen are called peasants. Their stat line is pretty bad, but they're cheap, and they come with a skill we haven't seen yet: Fend. When you block a player with Fend and they're pushed back out of their square, you aren't allowed to follow up. It doesn't matter if you've knocked them down or not. Fend can be a useful defensive skill as a late pick on a valuable player, but in this game it probably won't be more than a mild annoyance to us. Blockers are an interesting piece. They have access to general and strength skills, and they start with Wrestle. Normally you'd want your players with strength access to have block instead, because that works more naturally with Mighty Blow and Guard, but Brets don't really get a choice here. Blockers are fine players for the price. They're not bad at all. They're just a little awkward to use effectively sometimes. And Blitzers are the heart of the team. They have above average statistics and start with 3 useful skills. We know all about block, and catch is just a skill reroll for trying to catch a moving ball. It applies in a lot of different situations, so it's nice to have for free. Their 3rd skill is Dauntless. This lets them punch above their weight. When they block a player who is stronger than they are, they have a chance to get a temporary strength boost. This means that a Strength 3 Blitzer can punch a Strength 4 Black Orc, and it'll usually turn into a 1-dice block. This is obviously going to be pretty useful against us. Blitzers have normal access to general, agility, and passing skills, which is a pretty weird combination. It does mean that they can get to blodge right away, but unfortunately they don't have strength access. The most common starting build for Bretonnians is 4 Blitzers, 4 Blockers, 3 Peasants, and 2 rerolls. My opponent has gone with a different start. He's dropped 2 Blockers for a 3rd reroll. My opinion is that you can get away with only 2 rerolls if you start with 8 block or wrestle players. So this compromise to get a 3rd reroll isn't really necessary. It's not bad though, and I have seen other coaches experiment with it before. One last thing before we start. Let's take a quick look at my team. I sneakily made some changes off camera, adding at least one of every type of positional player. This is a pretty silly build, and I don't recommend it at all. I'm only doing it so I can show off all the different types of players in this video. On to the game. My opponent won the coin toss and elected to start on defense. I don't agree with this choice, and we'll see why not in a few minutes. I'm not a fan of his defensive formation either, so let's take a look at that now. Both teams need to have at least 3 players on the line of scrimmage, which is the 7 central squares along the halfway line. On defense, you almost never want more than 3, and they should be your worst players. The reason is simple. They're going to get blocked, possibly several times, and eventually they're going to get knocked down. If someone's going to be killed, it really ought to be your least valuable players. My opponent has got this much right. He's put 3 peasants on the line. He also has his most valuable players, the blitzers, hidden in the back. This is where they should be, so I won't be able to blitz one of them on my turn and maybe injure one right away. They are screened off by his other players, so I probably won't be able to get to them. The thing I don't like about this setup is that his team is too far back. Everyone who isn't on the line of scrimmage should usually be at least 2 squares back, because if they're only 1 square away, then I can reach them on a quick snap kickoff event. Your players shouldn't be much deeper than that, though. First of all, a blitz kickoff event can be a huge momentum swing for the defense. Blitzes aren't too common, but if one happens, my opponent is in no position to take advantage of it. He's just too far away. He's also not really putting much pressure on me. I can relax and take my time gathering the ball, and I won't have to dedicate any other players to protecting it. We'll see what I do with that time shortly. Finally, he's just giving up a lot of space. Orcs are a slow team, and they want to rumble down the field a few steps at a time. It's much easier for them if you let them start 3 or 4 squares into your half of the field. Here's a top-down view of the defense. The 8 backfield players could all be farther forward. I'd prefer to see them in these squares instead. Offensive setups are a little more complicated because you have to react to what the defense has done. In this case, I've just gone with a big wall of orcs on the line of scrimmage. It's not subtle, but there's no reason to be. I've kept my thrower deep to catch the kick, and my goblin is hiding behind the line where he's safe. Goblins have the stunty skill, which makes them more susceptible to injuries, and they're only armor 7 to begin with, so I don't ever want mine to get knocked over. And while we're here, stunty has 2 other effects. Goblins can't pass the ball well, but I don't care about that. The interesting effect of stunty is that goblins can dodge through any number of tackle zones without a penalty. I don't want to spoil anything, but that is going to matter later. This series of dodges would be a bunch of 6+ for anyone else, but it's pretty easy for a goblin to do. Usually. Back to the field. Normally I would try to keep a few players back a bit and wider, something like this. This is to help cover the sidelines in case of a blitz, and to make sure I have people available to help protect the ball. Today I don't have to worry about any of that, because my opponent is set up too deep to effectively threaten anything. So we finally get to the opening kickoff, and the kickoff event is a perfect defense. My opponent chooses to move even farther backwards, which is just handing me an enormous amount of space. I know it feels like I've been harping on this for a while, but it's very important. I can do whatever I want here. I'm going to make a lot of early progress, and I won't even bother to protect the ball because I don't have to. Remember when I said I didn't agree with my opponent's choice to start on defense? We're about to see one reason why. I'm just going to start my turn with line of scrimmage blocks, diagonally of course. We get one removal and one stun, which isn't bad. No problem picking up the ball either, and I'm going to use my goblin to do a foul. Fouls are a possibility I've hinted at before, but haven't really explained. Once per turn, you can try to kick a player when he's down. This is a straight armor roll against them, and you get +1 for every nearby unmarked teammate, just as if it were a block. Fouls are not without risk. My player might be spotted by the referee and sent off. The odds of this vary, but are generally between about 15 and 30%. Fouls are a divisive topic. Some people think it's mean to try to hurt their players, while others think it goes against the spirit of Blood Bowl if you don't ever foul. In my opinion, it's just another tactical possibility. Sure, I'm trying to hurt this guy, but I'm trying to hurt someone with every block I throw too. I don't foul often, but when I think the reward is worth the risk, I'll go for it. In this case, the reward isn't great, I'm only hitting a peasant, but the risk is pretty low too. I'm using my worst player, the goblin, to foul with, and I won't be too upset if I lose him. Notice also that I can get plenty of easy assists here, because, again, the defense is too far back to capitalize on how I've shifted everyone over to the same place. Things work out in my favor this time, and I get an injury out of it. This will actually be the only foul I do all game. I'll have other opportunities that some coaches might consider taking, but I'm happy with this start, and I don't need to take any unnecessary risks. I'm now 2 players up. My opponent hasn't even had a turn yet. This is the dark side of starting on defense. You won't always get murdered on the line of scrimmage, but it happens sometimes. And now he's going to be on the back foot for the whole game. Anyway, it doesn't look like I'll have any serious trouble with my game plan, which is to hold onto the ball and score on turn 8. Yep, it's time to explain the 2-1 grind. The 2-1 grind is the most basic overall strategy for a game of Blood Bowl, and one of the most effective. Every team can use it, and for many, especially slower, bashier teams, it is by far their best option. Here's how it works. We've started on offense, so we'll pick the ball up and hold it for the entire first half. We'll spend our time beating up on our opponents and slowly moving forward until we score on turn 8. They'll only have one turn to counter before halftime, which is possible, but it isn't very easy, so we probably go into halftime with a 1-0 lead. In the second half, it's our opponent's turn to play offense. They can do the same thing to us, of course, but this means playing for a draw at best, and you'll usually find that your opponents won't be too happy to settle for this. Their alternative is to try to score quickly, say around turn 10 or 11. This is riskier, and even if it does work, look what happens. Now it's turn 11 or so, the score is tied, and we're back on offense again. It's the same situation as at the beginning of the game. We can spend the whole second half punching and slowly moving forward and score again on turn 16, grinding them into dust and winning 2-1. Of course, they'll be trying to steal the ball away from us and score themselves, but their job will usually be a lot harder than ours. That's the plan anyway. So how does the defense stop this? Well, in the first half you have 2 options, assuming you can't just steal the ball and score yourself. You can try to stop them from scoring at all, or you can try to force them to score early and give yourself more time to counter. Either way, you hope to go into halftime tied. Neither plan is easy to pull off, and we'll see me try a bit of both in the second half. And incidentally, this is why we don't want to score too quickly on our first half offense. Not only do we give up the chance of a 2-1 grind, we'd be giving our opponent the chance to do it to us. The next few turns will be pretty simple. I'm going to take blocks where I can, blitzing mostly for attrition unless I have something more important to do, and moving forward slowly and as safely as I can. Now that the ball carrier is starting to get close to the defense, I'll need to protect him, and the simplest way to do this is to put him in a cage. This is the basic X cage formation. Nobody can blitz the ball carrier without first making a dodge into 3 tackle zones. This is quite difficult, and there's no place to assist from either, so most teams won't even try it unless they're desperate. Once we have some levels on our team, we'll want to have at least 2 opposite cage corners with the guard skill. This means that even if an enemy player sneaks into the cage somehow, there will always be a friendly guard assist against them. There are all types of other ways to cage, and we'll see more examples in future videos. The basic X cage is fine in many situations, though. One potential weakness is if your opponent has a wizard. This 3x3 formation is just begging for a fireball. Notice that I don't really even need these players in the back, as there are no enemy players in a position to threaten me from behind. Partly I'm just being super conservative, and partly I don't want to move my troll any more than necessary. But why not? Well, as a big guy, the troll has some serious drawbacks to compensate for his high strength. We know he's a loner, but he has 2 other problems. The funnier problem only comes up when he's trying to throw a goblin. Trolls are big and dumb, and goblins are small and delicious apparently, so sometimes the troll will pick up a goblin and then decide he would rather have a snack than a teammate. Usually he'll realize in time that you aren't supposed to eat your friends, but sometimes he'll just swallow the goblin whole. It's dead and gone, and there's nothing you can do about it. The more practical problem is that he is really stupid. Commonly called a nega trait, really stupid means that you have to roll a 2+ anytime you ask him to do anything. If you fail that roll, he'll get confused and do nothing. Even worse, he'll start daydreaming and will lose his tackle zones, so enemies can walk right past him without dodging, and he can't assist nearby blocks. He'll continue in this state until you successfully convince him to do something on a future turn. Even worse, if he doesn't have a smarter teammate standing next to him to keep him focused, his really stupid dice roll will be a 4+ instead. This means that you can't reasonably do anything with him if he's all alone, and if you let him get isolated from the rest of the team, he's basically out of the game. What all this means is that I have to be very careful, as long as I'm using the troll to help protect the ball. The simplest thing is to try to move him around as little as possible. He can't go stupid if we don't ask him to do anything. If I do need him to move, I always have to be aware of the chance that he might not do it. This means moving him early in the turn if possible, when I still have time to change plans if he doesn't cooperate. And of course I'll try to never activate him unless he has a teammate nearby. One of the most well-known sayings in the Blood Bowl community is safe moves first. In simple terms, you should try to make riskier moves at the end of your turn, so if you fail, you've done as much as you can before the turnover. Let's take a close look at my turn 3 and see how well I manage it. As turns go, this is a pretty simple one. We have 2 blocks and we're eventually going to take both. We'll blitz this fellow out of the way and we'll move our cage all the way up into this empty space. Since most of our players are just going to move around a bit, we should do that first. If we start with the blocks, we might roll a double skull and turn over, and then we'd miss the chance to move our other players. It's unlikely, of course, but these small margins add up to more wins in the long run. My first move is with the troll, because I know where he's going, and I want to make sure he gets there. I also plan on moving the thrower eventually, and the troll has to go first, while he still has a buddy nearby. And then I start blocking people, immediately breaking the rule I'm trying to teach you about. Well, I can't move this player yet, because we're going to blitz with him shortly. But these 3 orcs are just going to move forward, and I should have done all this first. Again, small margins. So we get our cage established, and it's finally time to take this last block. And once again, I fail to do this correctly. I'm not going to move this player, because if the block is only a push, I'll want to push the enemy player here and get a follow-up block. These 2 players, however, are just going to move, and I should have done that first. The blitzer is probably fine where he is, but there's no reason at all for the black orc to stay in the backfield. So I make the block, all goes well, and everyone moves to where they need to be. It looked like a successful turn, right? I took all the blocks I wanted to, knocked down a few people, and made plenty of forward progress. But as we've seen, I could have done it much better. These are the kind of mistakes that are very difficult to stop, because you almost always get away with them, and when you don't, it just looks like you were unlucky. If I had played correctly, we'd be in exactly the same position, but it was still sloppy work on my part. The other important thing is that if I hadn't gone back to carefully review this game, I wouldn't even have thought about this turn. My brain would have filed it under easy turn, no problems, if I remembered it at all. The lesson here is that you should review your games after you play them, and look for things you could have done better or differently. You'll never stop making errors if you don't even know that you're making them. Safe moves first isn't always the right play. Sometimes you can't move a player yet because you don't know where he's going, and it depends on what else happens in the turn. For example, I didn't move this orc until I knew he wouldn't be needed where he was. It's a good general rule to keep in mind, though, and you usually shouldn't violate it without a reason. So the last few turns haven't been too exciting. I'm just rolling forward slowly, punching people when I can. When the defense shifts a bit too far to the left, I'll move to the right, and vice versa. This is slow, but it is turn 4 and I'm already in scoring range, so I don't need to do anything crazy. Let's look at the ball again, because at the moment, it isn't really in a recognizable cage. We do have a giant blob of orcs around it though, so it's pretty safe. There are no easy ways to get to the ball carrier. There is another problem though, and it is that my cage, such as it is based. My black orc on the corner here is marked by a peasant. This should set off alarm bells in your head, because a based cage is usually not a cage at all. In this case, the peasant could knock the black orc out of the way and leave the ball carrier exposed to a blitz. This time it isn't really dangerous because there are no supporting defenders nearby. Even if the peasant did manage to get the black orc out of the way, there's nobody else who can attack the ball carrier. As a general rule though, this is a situation to avoid when you can. Here, we'll get to see the Dauntless skill in action. This is my opponent's turn 5, and he plays it well. He starts with all his safe moves first, and then takes the only block I've left him. For anyone else, this would be a 1-dice block, but Dauntless works and turns it into a 2-dicer, and he's rewarded by knocking out a black orc. And before you start shouting about how it was a random, lucky removal, remember that I chose to put that orc there. Let's flash back to last turn. I moved my black orc forward to try to split his team in half and help force my way through the middle of the field. I knew he'd probably have to take a punch, but I thought it was worth the risk. I gave my opponent the chance to block him, he took it, and it worked out for him. Was it the right move? I don't know, but I'd probably do it again. It's easy to judge a play by results, but this doesn't work very well in Blood Bowl. There's just too much randomness in the game to say that a play was good because it worked, or bad because it didn't. Somewhere around here, I make a major strategic error. I am dominating the game and have plenty of rerolls, so I should have tried to hand the ball off to a blitzer and score with him. One of my main goals for this game is, or at least should be, to score 2 touchdowns with the same player, ideally one of my blitzers. This will give him 6 star player points and a level up, and moving on to our second game with a Mighty Blow blitzer would be a very nice advantage to have. Unfortunately, I play this too conservatively, and just score with my thrower, who's been carrying the ball all game. This is the safest thing, of course, because there are no extra dice to roll. In this case, I think the small risk of failing to get the ball to a blitzer is outweighed by the large upside of scoring with a player who needs the SPP. It's too late to try this safely on turn 8, but if I start trying around turn 6 or 7, I'll have several chances to make a single 3+ roll, and I probably still score close to 100% of the time. There's also no real danger that my opponent will grab the ball, run away, and score, so the worst case scenario is we go into halftime tied. Not ideal, but it's not the end of the world either, and I definitely should have gone for it. My opponent has his turn 8 after I score, but there isn't a whole lot he can do with it. The kickoff event is a blitz, but I can't do anything much with that either, so I just punch him in and move some other players around for no clear reason. My opponent does much the same, and he also takes the opportunity to throw a vanity pass. This gets one of his players an SPP, and there's no reason not to try it. You'll see this a lot at the end of a half. So it's halftime. Time to take stock. We had a player KO'd in the first half, but he's woken up and we'll have a full team for the second half. My opponent will have 9 players on offense, and he's facing an uphill battle. I'm on defense now, so I have to set up first. I said earlier that we should have our 3 worst players on the line of scrimmage, but one problem with Orcs, and with this team build especially, is that I don't have 3 players worth sacrificing on LOS duty. It's fine to put the Troll on the line. He's more of a defensive type of big guy, and clogging up the middle of the field is a job he is well suited for. I would like to have 2 linemen flanking him, but I don't have any linemen. The Goblin is too fragile, and the Blitzers are too good, so by default I end up with 2 Black Orcs on the line. I'm not totally pleased with this, but there aren't any perfect choices here. All 3 players are next to each other, so the Troll will have friends nearby. And they're right in the middle because the rest of my team is spread wide and someone has to protect the center. I'm using a common setup, sometimes called the chevron formation. The advantage of this is that it covers the sidelines well, but the disadvantage is that my opponent has a wide variety of targets to hit with his blitz. Only 2 players are out of his reach, and they are the 2 weakest, the Thrower and the Goblin. I chose this formation here because the chevron is difficult to score quickly against. There's no obvious path through for my opponent. If he wants to go for a win, he'll have to take some risks. I don't have to try to stop him, of course. If we can encourage him to score quickly, that gives us plenty of time to put the 2-1 grind plan into action. That might actually have been the better way to defend. With a 2-player advantage, though, I felt that I had excellent chances to stop him from scoring entirely, and win either 1-0 or 2-0. Let's see how that works out for us. My opponent makes a very risky play here on turn 9, and just barely gets away with it. Before trying to pick up the ball, he really needs to move one of his spare players into this square to screen it off from the Orcs. Really, any of these squares would be okay. The point is, you should always be thinking about what might happen if your dice rolls don't work. In this case, if he fails the pickup, the ball will scatter randomly into one of the nearby squares. If it scatters forwards, the Orcs will just go pick it up and the game is effectively over. In this case, he does fail his pickup, but at least the scatter is good for him. Now I have some options, and I don't think I chose the best plan. I don't usually like giving my opponent too many chances to block my players, but this is a situation where swarming his team and facing everyone would probably work out pretty well. If I try something like this, he will have some very difficult dice rolls to make, and a failure could be a disaster. Instead, I chose to try to pin him to the sideline. This isn't so bad either, but it's less ambitious. Unfortunately, at the end of the turn, I had to put my goblin in harm's way. The idea was to make it harder for him to move back to the center of the pitch. I wanted my troll doing that job, but he failed his really stupid roll, so we have to make do. So my opponent is able to consolidate, and even get the ball safe in a cage. I'm hoping to cut him off from the rest of his team, but I roll a double skull on my blitz here. There's a powerful temptation to reroll something like this, but it's probably a mistake to do so. It's turn 10, and I only have 2 rerolls for the rest of the game, so I really need to save them for later. This failure is annoying, but it isn't going to change the result of the game, so it's best to just let it go. In hindsight, it's not even clear what my opponent should do to take advantage of this opening. It's probably a good idea to move his cage backwards and into the center of the field. Nobody likes retreating, but it would be nice to get his team back together. The 2 players on the far wing could also swing back into the middle, or run down the field for a future desperation passing play. In response, I'm still trying to keep his team split up and disorganized. He needs a touchdown, and eventually he'll have to try something. I just want to be ready for when that happens. For the last few turns, my thrower has been hanging out behind my line. He's staying safe, but he's also acting as a shallow sweeper. If my opponent finds a way to break through the line, he'll be there to cover. At the moment, I also have a blitzer sweeping, but this black orc is just going to go engage one of the enemies in the backfield. We're about to see how important the role of a sweeper is, because they're going to abandon their posts this turn. It's turn 12, and I'm sensing my chance. We can shove these players out of the way and get to the ball carrier. Along the way, I'll even manage to surf one of his players. This is an interesting position, and it's worth thinking about some, to try to work out what you might be able to do. I'm pretty happy with the solution I came up with, though it isn't perfect. We do get rid of one blitzer, and my thrower is able to come over and sack the ball carrier. The ball scatters off the field. When this happens, it is randomly thrown back in by the crowd, and it can go anywhere. And here's the first bit of bad luck for me. Anywhere turns out to be right in the arms of one of my opponent's blitzers. This is where you really have to focus. It's easy to get angry. You just made a nice play, and your opponent's position somehow managed to get better because of it. You can't afford to waste time or mental energy being upset about random events, though. The situation has changed, and you need to adjust to it. Worrying about the past isn't going to help. I don't have much left I can do right now. I chose to bring my last few unmoved players over to mark the ball. Maybe I should have covered the unmarked blitzer in my backfield, but I thought this was quite safe, and I'd be able to crush him next turn. In response, my opponent finds a really nice play, pushing 2 of my orcs out of the way and dodging through the rest. One handoff later and he's going to score, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Everything I just said about focus applies here. I'm pretty upset about what's happened, but I can still win this game if I keep a cool head. It won't be as easy as it looked a few minutes ago, but it's still on the table. And for the record, the hard part of all that was a 1 dice blitz, followed by a 4+3+ dodge. With a team reroll in hand, that sequence is about 50-50 to work. I haven't even really been unlucky. I've just allowed a coin flip to succeed. That's all. Remember when I said that my thrower was going to wander away from his post as a sweeper? Well, to sack the ball carrier there, I had to commit all my reserves, and there was nobody left to stop what just happened. And that's the most important lesson of this whole video, and maybe the whole series. If you think you've been unlucky, go back and see what you could have done differently. It's surprising how often you'll find that your bad luck is at least partly your own fault. Here's what my sweepers actually did last turn. In this case, I misjudged how easily my opponent would be able to slip through my net, and so I ignored his downfield threats. Instead, I could have attacked those threats doing something like this. I don't get to sack the ball here, but do I really need to? I've said earlier that you shouldn't judge a play by its results, and maybe I'm guilty of doing that here. I did show this position to several other coaches, and most agree that I should have paid more attention to the enemy players in my backfield. But there are a lot of different possible ways to play the turn. So it's too late to stop him from scoring, and the plan now is to make sure he scores as quickly as possible. I want all the time I can get to try to score back. We'll start by punching people, because we always want to be punching people. In this case, we get a couple of injuries, which will end up being very helpful. Everyone else just starts on their walk of shame. Note that we don't need to risk any GFIs here. We can't catch his ball carrier, and we're close enough that he can't escape us next turn. So we'll have 3 turns to try to win. Not ideal, but it could be worse, so the 2-1 grind plan is still on. My blitzers are my fastest players, so I've set up 3 of them, right on the halfway line, and the 4th is drifting in the backfield in case he's needed. I've also put the goblin next to the troll, in case we need to try to throw him forward, but this is unlikely to be necessary. We get a bit of good luck when the kickoff ends up on the wrong side of halfway. After a quick check, I find that one of my blitzers has 4-star player points from causing 2 injuries, so I give him the ball. He's a little farther away from the end zone, but if he scores, he'll get a level up. So we just run everybody forward. Nothing subtle here, and my opponent doesn't really have enough players left to stop me. Let's look at my turn 15 here, and introduce the concept of scoring threats. You'll often hear these called canoring threats instead, after a well-known Blood Bowl coach who did a lot to emphasize their importance. The idea is simple. If my turn 15 ends and none of my players can reach the end zone, well, I'm not going to score on turn 16, am I? As the turn starts, I have exactly one orc in scoring range, and just barely. It will take him 2 GFIs to do it. Let's say I start my turn with something irrelevant, like this block, and I roll a bunch of skulls and turn over. Then all my opponent has to do is blitz my only scoring threat, and I'm out of luck. Okay, that isn't quite true. I actually do have a second threat to score, but it's one that won't exist in most games. I could hand the ball to my goblin, run the troll forward, and try to throw the goblin all the way to the end zone. I really don't want to have to rely on that though. So let's do some safe moves first, and move more orcs into scoring range. When it comes down to your second to last turn, you always want to have multiple scoring threats. And you should usually set these up first, or at least as soon as you safely can. If you only have one player who can score, the defense will usually be able to shut him down. And conversely, when you're on defense in a situation like this, attacking your opponent's scoring threats is often the best way to try to stop him. Let's zoom forward to my final turn, where things get really ugly. The first, most obvious plan is to simply one-dice blitz the player near the sideline. Note that we can't have an assist here, because an orc in this square would block the path of the ball carrier to the end zone. If we're willing to spend a reroll on this play, it's almost 90% to succeed. It's not elegant, but it is the best chance to score. Instead, I got enamored with the idea of blocking this player on the side and running all the way around, because I misread the situation and thought I would get a 3-dice blitz. Somewhere around here, I realized this wasn't going to work, but I thought I was committed, so I tried it anyway. Even after moving up all these assists, it still isn't too late to go back to the right plan. Once I've blitzed the wrong guy, now I'm stuck. I even managed to push the blitzer into the wrong square, so I don't have an easy dodge through with the ball carrier. With only a few seconds left on my clock and no idea how I'd managed to screw up this turn so badly, I realized that I have one resource left. Remember way back before the game even started, when I told you how stunty works? Well, my orc blitzer can't reasonably dodge right up the sideline, but my goblin can. And that's a silly and embarrassing ending to a game. My turn 16 scoring play ended up being about 60% to succeed, when the obvious play was nearly 90%. I saw it immediately, I knew how good it was, and I tried something different anyway, because I wanted to get fancy. I've encouraged you to not do one-dice blocks, and I didn't want to do one myself, even though it was by far the best choice there. The lesson is, you shouldn't be too dogmatic. General rules are helpful guides, but in a game as complicated as Blood Bowl, there will always be exceptions. I made one more mistake, but we won't be able to see it here in the replay. After the game ends, each coach rolls one die to see how much money they earned. If you won the game, you can choose to re-roll that die. I rolled a 2 after this game, which gave me just enough money to buy an apothecary. A 2 isn't a very good roll, but it was exactly what I needed, and I should have stuck with it. Instead, I got greedy and re-rolled into a 1, and now I only have 40k in my bank. So this is what the team looks like after one game. It's fine, of course, but if I had been a little smarter, I could have had a blitzer with Mighty Blow and an apothecary. Sure, I won the game, but I could have done so much better. Before I leave you, I want to talk about how this team could develop going forward. I still want an apothecary, and probably a lineman as a 12th player. The goblin is likely to die soon, and I'd replace him with another lineman instead. He may have been the hero today, but I wouldn't count on that happening too often. The first blitzer to level will take Mighty Blow to blitz with. He'll later add Piling On and Tackle. Other blitzers can start with Guard, and Block Guard are the first skills I want on Black Orcs also. Some coaches prefer more Mighty Blow early, but I like the suffocating power that a lot of Guard gives you. If you stick with the Thrower, you'll want Block, and then usually kick off Return. We haven't seen that skill yet, but it helps to offset his poor speed. He can take Dodge on a double, but other Orcs will mostly want to skip doubles, and take Strength skills instead. Everyone on an Orc team likes plus Strength, but I'll only want plus Movement or Agility on my Ball Carrier, be that a Blitzer or the Thrower. And with that, we are finished with the Beginner series. There's still plenty to learn and a lot of topics to cover, so I'll be back soon with intermediate level videos. I'd like to do some more complete games like this one, but I don't want to overwhelm anybody, so we'll go back to shorter, more focused videos for a while. In the meantime, remember that you can't learn to be a winning coach just by watching other people play. You need experience too. So go on, get out there, make yourself a team, and play some games. And I'll see you all soon.